Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by San Pellegrino. A meal isn't just about what's on your plate. It's about what you bring to the table. San Pellegrino believes the table is where the best of life happens. That's what makes gathering around it so rich and rewarding. And with their unique sparkling natural mineral water, San Pellegrino brings its best so you can bring yours.
Welcome to Fortune's Wheel Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan. This is our fourth episode in our brand new series exploring the foundations of medieval philosophy, beginning long before there was any sense of what we call Western civilization today. Socrates' star pupil, Plato, takes center stage after the death of the old sage of Athens in 399 BC. On this episode, we will be introduced to Plato's early life before launching right into one of his first major contributions to Western philosophy. The answer, hopefully, to what is truth. I humbly ask you all to share the show with others and let them know about our new series on philosophy that will be running alongside our medieval story episodes. Also, if you wouldn't mind giving a 5-star and written review on your chosen podcast platform, it does wonders for catapulting shows like this one to reach the homepages of potential listeners. This is Philosophy Episode 4 entitled Plato, the Shape of Reality. Thank you for your support, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. Plato never saw his teacher and friend drink the cup of hemlock. He was too ill at the time to attend, but Socrates left such an impression on him that he created a series of stories that would speak to future generations. We broke down several of those stories, what are called dialogues, on the last episode. But it's time for Plato to step out of his teacher's mind-bogglingly long shadow, and let's not kid ourselves here, Plato does indeed step out of Socrates' shadow. Let's paint ourselves a picture here to really ground us in this episode's setting. A young man of 28 years old was walking along one of Athens' many stoas. Stoas, translated as painted porch. A stoa was a long walkway where every sort of community gathered. It could house markets full of haggling merchants and consumers, or small crowds wrapped in attention watching one of Athens' numerous orators, most likely at the time one of the visiting sophists, trying to drum up business or expand his influence and renown. Plato walked past the goings-on of the Stoa, thinking. He had recovered from his recent illness, and he wandered the streets of Athens aimlessly, a student left in the vacuum of the sudden disappearance of his teacher. Socrates was dead, gone forever. And it occurred under the most unjust circumstances. What was a student to do in the absence of a teacher? He thought of everything that had brought him to that moment, walking the Stoa in the year 399 BC, pondering things like justice and profound loss. Plato was born in the year 427 BC in Athens to a well-to-do family who enjoyed strong connections to the city's elite and powerful. His father, Ariston, claimed descent from Codrus, a mythical king of Athens deep into the city's foggiest beginnings. His mother was named Perictione, and she was related to the great Athenian lawmaker Solon. Plato's connections were pretty much equivalent to being related to King Arthur on his father's side and to Winston Churchill on his mother's side. The guy's pedigree was stacked. What's more is that Plato wasn't even the man's real name. His real name was Aristocles. Plato was a nickname, most likely translated as slang for broad because of his exceptional broad chest and shoulders. Some chroniclers throw in his rather wide forehead too, but it most likely referred to his rather large athletic stature. We tend to think of these philosophers as some old pot-bellied men. That simply wasn't the case. Socrates was a hoplite warrior in his youth, and Plato was, to be honest, pretty jacked. According to some sources, Plato participated in the Isthmian Games, which were basically the Olympics' slightly less glamorous cousin. Plato was known as a wrestler of the highest caliber in his youth, and wrestling, actual wrestling, not that televised soap opera for men, actual wrestling back then wasn't the sterile, rules-based sport it is today. Now, I have immense respect for today's wrestlers, believe me. But back in Plato's day, you couldn't step in the circle and expect to step out in one piece. It was brutal. And using a little imagination, one can possibly make the connection that, if not officially, at least unofficially, Plato could very well have participated in what's called pancration. Pancration was the ancient Greek version of, like, Krav Maga meets Greco-Roman wrestling meets Fight Club, It was a no-shirt, no-shoes affair. Other than eye gouging and biting, everything else, go nuts. And yes, those weren't off limits either. Pancration was rough, man, and Greek wrestling was only slightly more civilized than that. So this gives us an idea of Plato's earliest days. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and most likely had an incredibly dangerous streak in his core nature, which makes his fate as a follower of Socrates, as an eventual Western civilization-defining philosopher, that much more of a miracle. Now, besides being a wrestler, Plato was also raised in an environment where political life was front and center. Discussions about politics and law were as common in his household as were discussions of weather, though Athens was going through some turbulent times after losing the Peloponnesian War to Sparta recently. Wrestling and politics, this was Plato's life up through his 20s, and it was sometime in his early to mid-20s that he met the notorious wandering old philosopher Socrates. Surely he'd already heard of Socrates. Surely. But somehow, they made each other's acquaintance, and Plato quickly became one of Socrates' finest pupils. We can assume this was between the years 407 to 402 BC. Now, thinking back on this, Plato probably racked his brain trying to sort the whole thing out. Regardless of whether he met the old man in 407 or 402, the maximum number of years Plato could have been a student of Socrates' wouldn't have been more than 8 years. Now, I don't know about you, but Plato's writings have created a link so strong between the two men that you'd think they'd been together for decades. But no, it was only between 3 and 8 years they'd been teacher and student. But at the end of it all, again, in the year 399 BC, when Socrates drank the hemlock and became a martyr for philosophy, Plato just couldn't wrap his head around the whole thing. What went wrong? Why did Athens, a democracy, kill its wisest man? What must this say about democracy itself? And when we arrive at an answer, what's to say it's the right one? In fact, what does it even mean to be right? What defines truth? These shower thoughts, we could call them, they actually led to Plato's first great philosophical question. What is truly real? Now, in Plato's books entitled The Republic, Phaedo, Phaedrus, and Symposium, the question, what is reality, is directly tackled. Plato would have looked at it like this if he was living today. He would have been one of the hundreds of millions to have read the Harry Potter series. And odds are, he would have fallen in love with it, much like I did. But see, he would have then gone to the movie to see the Chris Columbus film version and would have been unable to watch them. A lot of people are like this too. Not me. I love those movies. But I understand the sentiment. The books are the real deal, the essence, so to speak, of the ideas that J.K. Rowling was trying to get across in her infinite wisdom. However, the film version, it was an imitation. It wasn't the original. It was someone other than the author's version of that story. A film version of a novel, standing at the rim of the Grand Canyon while you sit at home looking at a photograph of it. These two things, see, Plato didn't just dip his toes into metaphysics with this idea about reality itself. Plato dove in head first, not knowing if it was the deep end or the shallow end. This idea of an original and another version of that same thing, that's called dualism. Plato believed that reality is divided into two levels, the immaterial and the material. The immaterial, he says, is the original, ideal version of that thing. J.K. Rowling's story in her mind. Or even the Grand Canyon, right, itself. While the material is the imitation that we're able to experience. Or Chris Columbus's film version. Or a photograph of the Grand Canyon. You get the idea. The immaterial existed as the blueprint for all versions of it in the material world. The immaterial fed the material world with aspects of it, but the material world would never be the ideal immaterial version. Therefore, Plato reasoned that the immaterial was the ultimate measurement of existence. The immaterial was that which nothing better could exist. For those medieval philosophy enthusiasts out there, that phrase right there may be sounding insanely loud bells ringing in your heads. Trust me, hold on to that phrase, that which nothing better could exist. Hold on to that. But let's extend it a little bit further so we can fully grasp this. Let's use the apple. I love apples. Let's use the apple. In the material world, there are over 7,500 apple varieties today. I don't know about you. Again, I love apples. There are the crisp and sweet Honeycrisp apples. There are the Macintosh apples that are great for apple sauces and ciders. And my personal favorite by far, the super tart Granny Smith apples. My mouth is watering just thinking about all of them. Now, in addition to these there's so many of them. There are Red Delicious, Golden Delicious, Ambrosia, Gala, Fuji, Brayburn, Jonathan, and Cortland apples. We're even creating new varieties seemingly growing every season, like the Cosmic Crisp, Envy, Jazz, Evercrisp, and even the Sugar Bee varieties. Apples, it's just never ending these days. But despite all of this variety, Plato would argue that there is still one ideal version of an apple. There is one perfect shape of an apple. There is one perfect smell of an apple. There is one perfect texture of an apple. There is one perfect way that the stem and the leaves come out of the top. There is one perfect skin, one perfect taste, on and on, right? And that perfect immaterial apple informs all 7,500 plus varieties we have today. But how do we know an apple when we see an apple? Well, it's round in a certain way, and it crunches when we bite into it just so, and we can pick them all off trees. Plato saw this perfect, ideal, immaterial apple as the blueprint of every single apple in existence. And we see and experience that particular immaterial apple not in its perfect, ideal, immaterial form, but in the form of a material version of it. And Plato saw this immaterial apple, this blueprint, in the same way he saw everything else in existence. Fish, thunder, trees, dogs, flowers, rocks, you name it, and it has an immaterial form that informs every other version of it. Each one of these things has what Plato calls the good. It's that version of the apple, for instance, that which there is no more ideal, perfect version. Plato writes in the Republic, quote, Just as the sun not only makes the visible things visible, but also causes their generation and growth and nourishment, though it is not itself generation, in the same way, the good not only gives their being to the objects of knowledge, but gives them their intelligibility. End quote. So, okay, let's just stop, take a breath. We need to take stock of this. Basically, Plato divides reality into two realms. Couple new terms for you. You have the world of forms, and you have the world of particulars. Now, the world of forms is the intelligible realm where the ideas of a thing are eternal, perfect, non-physical truths. As I said, essentially blueprints. The world of forms is what we were just calling the immaterial. Now, as you can probably extend this, the material that we were just referring to, he actually calls the world of particulars. And the world of particulars is the visible realm, where these ideas become physical, temporal, and inherently flawed reflections of those things found in the world of forms. Now, what the gods see is eternal and perfect, he would say. What you and I see are physical, flawed manifestations of those exact same things. Now, this all led Plato to lay out one of his most famous scenarios. Out of all of Plato's writings, this one always seems to rise to the top of Western culture. We see it in a range of mediums today, from, The Legend of Zelda, the Ocarina of Time video game, to movies such as The Truman Show and The Matrix. You've probably guessed it already. We're talking about Plato's Allegory of the Cave. Now, Plato envisioned this dualism, this immaterial versus material, this world of forms versus the world of particulars. He envisioned this dualism when he said that people live their entire existences inside of a cave. But see, our experiences and our perceptions are not what they think they are. We sit inside this cave, chained to the floor, staring at one wall, unable to look anywhere else. Behind us is a fire, and those perfect eternal forms just slide by one after another, and their shadows are cast upon the wall in front of us. We perceive these shadows as the real objects. But make no mistake, we're fooled by this. If you think this is crazy, stop and think about what keeps us, mindlessly flipping through our Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, becoming green with envy at the lives of our friends and family, and even strangers. Those lives that they're living, when in reality, we see only the things they want us to see about their lives. In essence, we're chained to our own ignorance, watching these shadows on our cell phone screens. The same goes for advertisements and weight loss videos, self-help articles. So will we ever find a way to break free from the chains of limiting our perceptions? Well, Plato tells us about one man in his allegory who realized his chains were there, and he broke them. He stood up, looking all around, and noticed something was amiss. This, of course, is extremely painful, but he walks around the wall that was behind him and sees that very fire blazing, and he sees the perfect forms going by one at a time, casting shadows upon the far wall. He realizes everything he's been taught and everything he'd experienced was a complete and utter lie. Or at least it wasn't the full truth. Walking past this fire, he sees the entrance to the cave, and he heads straight toward it. The closer he gets, the brighter the light, and it's nearly unbearable by the time he gets to the cave opening. Taking his first steps outside, his vision is so blurred and it's so painful that he's forced to keep his eyes down toward the ground. The man will question whether he should turn back. This is too painful. He's not ready. He shouldn't be there. Plato writes, quote, "And if he is compelled to look straight at the light, will he not have pain in his eyes, which will make him turn away to take refuge in the objects of vision which he can see, and which he will think clearer than what is now being shown to him?" End quote. He cannot see everything in this world due to this painful light, this light that can be interpreted as reality or truth. But his eyes down, eventually, he finds water. And in this water are the reflections of everything he can't see with his own eyes. After a while, through the pain, the man will be able to look up and see more and more and more of the world around him. Plato writes in the Republic, quote, "Last of all, he will be able to see the sun, and not mere reflections of it in the water, but the sun itself in its own proper place." End quote. Plato's telling us that only through reason and a rather painful reorientation of the soul, I should add, do we ascend to the world of forms, culminating in understanding the form of the good, which is, in this example, the metaphysical sun illuminating everything below in its truth. You can probably equate certain enlightened individuals in history as having been that person to emerge from the metaphorical cave. Buddha, Jesus, Neo from the Matrix, right? But Plato also follows that up with a warning. That man who saw reality in its truest form outside of the cave, well, he would immediately want to go back and tell everyone else about it. Of course he would. He would encourage them to break their own chains and follow him into the light. But these people would refuse him, reject him, and even ridicule him. It was inevitable, Plato argued, because people don't always want to know the truth if what they are currently experiencing is good enough. Besides, the truth is a painful thing at first. Even before Plato's time, Jews equated truth to fire. Why do you think Yahweh appeared to Moses in a burning bush? Nobody seeks out pain, right? We're good right here with our never-ending zoetrope of shapes and shadows, you know? But what are we left with? We're left with reason, since none of us know exactly how to break these chains. Reason can get us pretty far down the road, Plato argued. And the first step is to understand that there are forms and there are particulars. It's like this. You know that juicy, perfectly cooked, right off the grill hamburger? The one on the commercials, right? The burger sits atop the perfect size bun, melted cheese dripping off the sides, tomato, lettuce, 3 strips of thick, hickory smoked bacon. Well, that's the form of a hamburger on that advertisement. The real thing's quite different, right? Soggy bun, unmelted cheese halfway on the burger, halfway in the wrapper, a smashed partly green tomato. That's the burger you actually experience as you unwrap your long-awaited meal in the parking lot. The form is the burger in the advertisement. The particular is the burger in the parking lot. Okay, it's not always that bad. I mean, the particular of the apple, say the Granny Smith, I think is a pretty good imposter to the form of the apple, right? But knowing the difference is the first step down the road to understanding the true nature of an apple, Plato would argue. He writes in the Republic, quote, "The intelligible realm, or the world of forms, is grasped by the mind, not by sight, and it is most certain," end quote. This delineation between our world and some perfect, dare I say, heavenly realm is an important push forward in Western thinking. To be sure, Plato didn't originate the idea of heaven by any means whatsoever, but he put it front and center as a realm that can still be explored through human reasoning. And that is an important leap forward.
Switch to Verizon Business and get more from your internet without paying more for your internet. Get LTE Business Internet starting at $39 a month when paired with select business mobile plans. That's unlimited data, and with it, unlimited possibilities. Start saving today with Verizon Business, ranked #1 in small business internet customer satisfaction by J.D. Power. Starting price for 25 megabits per second LTE internet plan with smartphone plan savings, plus taxes, fees, and economic adjustment charge. Terms apply. For J.D. Power 2024 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
So if there's a world of forms and a world of particulars, that is, if there is a world that can only be accessed through our minds, through reason, and there is a world that can only be accessed through our senses, then Plato is implying there's a natural hierarchy to this thing we call reality, right? Plato argues that the world of particulars, the world we access every day through our senses, is actually less real than the world of forms. Why? Because the world we experience every day is in constant flux and change. Just think of all the types of apples we have today. How that number just keeps rising each year. However, the world of forms is so perfect and it's so ideal that there's no possible way to improve the forms of things. And this implies that the world of forms is unchanging due to its inherent perfection. This, again, my friends, is an implication that reality is built upon a necessary and inherent hierarchy. And at the peak of this hierarchy, he says, is the form of the good, the highest and most important form, illuminating all other forms and representing ultimate truth, goodness, and even reality itself. Now, Plato's Allegory of the Cave is simply a metaphor for the ascent from ignorance to knowledge of that ultimate good, that ultimate understanding of the nature of reality. And there are so many metaphors that can lead to the same conclusion. People sitting in a movie theater, the movie The Truman Show, Cartman living in his mother's basement, obsessed with video games, people glued to social media. Listen, a key idea to take away from all of this is that the form of the good is the sun in Plato's Allegory of the Cave. Just as the sun makes vision possible, the good makes knowledge possible. And maybe it'll help some of you out there to know that when I say things like the form of the good, or even just the good, I'm capitalizing the G in good. It stands that anything capitalized is important or specific, right? The good is that important specific thing that illuminates reality to us. It doesn't take much, right, to see how the early Christians took Plato's ideas and just ran with them. Plato gave not only early Christians, but really everyone, everywhere, a hierarchy of forms that begin to mold reality itself into something tangible and understandable. Plato essentially gives us the shape of reality. He begins to give us something to wrap our heads around when we think and talk about this thing, reality. He puts definitions on things that previously had no real, defining characteristics. There was no effective way to not be fooled by what we are experiencing. So now that Plato arrived at this shape of reality, we're left with our next big question. Knowing that our senses often deceive us with these, material versions, how do we know anything at all? Essentially, what is the difference between ignorance, opinion, and knowledge? Well, Plato needed to lay it out plainly because, let's be honest, a lot of us either are ignorant or we hold a lot of really strong opinions that we think are hard knowledge. I think we're all guilty of it to some extent. Now, it's one thing to say that there is one reality, but it's split into two parts, right? And it's a completely other thing to actually be able to build a structure of knowledge that proves that we know what we say we know. And he came up with a visual representation of the levels of knowledge and reality that he calls the divided line. And he has his own diagram for this, but I have one that might be a little more recognizable to us today. So let's just make our make ours into a pyramid shape. We all know the pyramid shape, right? You got the bottom being the least important, or at least the least real, right? While the capstone of the pyramid at the top is the best or most ideal. Have that in mind as we go into this next section here. Now, found in the Republic, Book 6, this thought experiment illustrates Plato's theory of knowledge and reality, dividing existence into not 2, but 4 levels of understanding. We still have our 2 realms, the world of forms and the world of particulars, but these are both now split into 2 sections of their own. Now follow me here. It's pretty fascinating stuff. Now the bottom level of our pyramid is called Acacia, or imagination, which is the least real of all of them. Imagination amounts to the shadows on the walls, reflections on the water. They're mere illusions. Now think scrolling on Instagram and believing everyone's life but yours is perfect, right? A lot of people get caught up here, with or without Instagram, and it's hindered many, many from growing and maturing throughout their lives. Now the next step up the pyramid, Plato calls pistis, or belief. Now belief is where people perceive physical objects but still lack true understanding, relying on the senses rather than reason. Now, when we do peel our faces off our phones, Plato would argue, when we look around us, this is where we are in terms of knowledge. We observe the things around us. We believe they exist. But we believe they exist only because we can sense them, right? Plato would say that this is a powerful level to be in, this level of observation. But we still don't fully understand the things around us because, we're stopping just short of understanding the nature of the things we see. Observation isn't proof of understanding. It may seem real, sure, but that doesn't mean you understand what you're observing. What's lacking is the application of reason. Let's take another step up the pyramid, and we leave the world of particulars behind, and we step into the world of forms, which Plato calls dianoia, or thought. This is the level of mathematical and scientific reasoning, where the mind uses hypotheses and logic to analyze the things we're observing. But still, we are relying largely on assumptions in this level. This is largely where the scientific method lies, integrating our observations with hypothetical testing. But it still falls just short of the full understanding of what we're observing. Now, the capstone, taking our last step up the pyramid, the capstone of the pyramid is where Plato feels we should all work to get to. He calls it gnosis, or simply understanding. This right here, folks, is the highest form of knowledge, where one truly grasps the forms, particularly the form of the good, through pure reason and philosophical insight. But this begs the question, a question we talked about in the last episode. It's actually Menno's paradox. If you don't know what you're looking for, how will you recognize it when you do find it? Plato's answer, or Socrates's, but you get it by now, is the theory of recollection. Now, I won't rehash the whole thing, but this is when Socrates questions the slave boy about that geometry question. Do you remember that? In the dialogue Menno, Plato writes, quote, "The soul then, as being immortal and having been born again many times, and having seen all things exist, whether in this world or in the world below, has knowledge of them all." End quote. Now, Plato argues that we do not, learn in the modern sense of the word. We actually recall knowledge from past incarnations of the soul. In Phaedo, Plato puts it this way, quote, "Thus the soul, since it is immortal and has been born many times and has seen all things here and in the underworld, has learned everything, and so has no difficulty in recalling. What we call learning is recollection." End quote. So Plato concludes that the soul must have known the capital T truth before birth. Again, learning is remembering, according to Plato. This entire pyramid model for the 4 levels of knowledge, well, Plato would say that before we were born, we were already accessing that highest level of understanding. In fact, having access to all knowledge at some point in our existence would imply that we pretty much lived in the world of forms before we were born, which is where the most perfect, ideal blueprints of everything existed, where the form of the good, that which nothing else can be more perfect, where that existed. Again, medieval writers will cling to this like an American does to a big gulp. Now, I'll skip ahead only to help prove the value of Plato's conclusions about what constitutes truth and knowledge, and even learning. The founder of Neoplatonism, Plotinus, many centuries after Plato, once wrote in his book Aeneads, describing self-improvement as the carving away excess from a block of marble. Plotinus writes, quote, "Withdraw into yourself and look, and if you do not find yourself beautiful yet, act as does the creator of a statue that is to be made beautiful. He cuts away here, he smooths there, until he causes the hidden beauty to stand forth." End quote. Essentially, Plato, and Plato's biggest fanboy centuries later, Plotinus, both hold that truth is already found within. One just needs to, quote-unquote, sculpt oneself until that truth is seen. To push this idea just a little further, in the 16th century, the famous Michelangelo once remarked, quote, "Every block of stone has a statue inside it, and it is the task of the sculptor to discover it." End quote. This Renaissance idea just resonates with Platonic thought on the mind, which is like a stone, having within it already knowledge, which is like the statue itself. See, today, when we learn something new, anything, right? Riding a bike or, philosophy or whatever, right? People often report a feeling that something was unlocked, right? I get this with my students in class. And for years, I've stated with great conviction that my most favorite sound in the whole world is when someone I'm teaching just goes, "Oh." I'm telling you, it's my favorite part of teaching. Learning often feels like overcoming something. It's sometimes painful, right? Science backs this up too. Plato saw learning as a process of remembering what the soul already knows. When we learn, are we discovering something new? Or are we just remembering what was always there? Well, we know where the likes of Plato, Plotinus, and Michelangelo stand on it, but I'm curious as to what you think. Make sure you leave a comment. Now, before we get out of here, though, Plato sums himself up by offering a distinction between opinion and knowledge. That was the question at the top of this section here. Opinion, or doxa, is based on the senses, which is to say opinion is only reliable to an extent. There is validity to an opinion, but it will never, ever prove anything to be true or false. It's just that. It's an opinion. Well, you could say, wait. Okay, if opinions, according to Plato, are based on our senses, and our senses rely on observation at some level, then how are opinions not very reliable? That's a valid question. But the reason they're not very reliable is that Plato concedes that our senses are how we observe, right? But what we observe is all contingent on our perceptions and previous experiences. Therefore, our opinions are only as valid as our experiences and perceptions allow them to be. And considering we all have different experiences, our opinions will never, ever fully align with someone else's. Opinions, consequently, Plato argues, are entirely unreliable. Now, knowledge, or what's called episteme, on the other hand, is observation rooted in reason and logic. It's an unchanging, principled stance with which to approach all that we observe, which unlocks our ability to see it, not how we want to see it, but how it truly is. Plato writes in the Republic, quote, "Opinion is the medium between knowledge and ignorance," end quote. Ouch. Kind of puts that one to bed, I'd say. So why does any of this matter to us, honestly? How do our daily lives rely on understanding these things? Well, to dip into Plato's political opinions, he would even tell you to take those for what they're worth. He thought that philosophers should rule because they are able to see beyond illusions. Now, he would argue that if we all practice knowing and understanding the things and situations around us more thoroughly, beyond merely existing within them and observing them and whatnot, if we were to all really dive in and try to understand this, then we would all be much more equipped to figure out problems, large and small. Today, between social media and Silicon Valley algorithms, he would look us straight in the eye and ask us, are you trapped in an echo chamber? Addicted to cognitive dissonance? Mistaking mere shadows for truth? Yeah. Regarding the idea of, fake news and propaganda and whatnot, Plato would urge us to realize that just because something is widely observed or even accepted, well, it doesn't mean it's inherently true. Philosophy, Plato believed, was liberation, not just in the physical world, but in our mental and our spiritual lives as well. Seeking truth is certainly painful. Man, is it painful sometimes. But to live in our true potential, that's absolutely necessary. Now, as for Plato's shape of reality and its impact on Christian thinking, his idea of dualism directly influenced the Christian view of the material world as lesser than divine. As for his ideas of the form of the good, this shaped Christian concepts of God as the source of truth itself. And honestly, I can't wait until we eventually get to St. Anselm of Canterbury for his take on Plato's form of the good. And Plato's allegory of the cave, it was widely used and adapted to describe the soul's journey toward salvation. And finally, Plato's divided line, or the pyramid model we used for the levels of understanding, well, this reinforced the idea that faith and reason work together in tandem to understand divine truth. So, if Plato teaches us that reality is intimately tied to truth, then how should we live? That is to say, how should we live in relation to others, in relation to our community, and in relation to nature itself? On the next episode, we're going to explore Plato's answer to the question, what does it mean to live the good life? Until next time.